About 2 summers ago, I had a row of tomato transplants that just would not take off. I'd done everything right, or so I thought. Good soil, consistent watering, hardened off properly before transplanting. But the lower leaves kept yellowing, the plants looked stunned, and after 3 weeks in the ground, they weren't much bigger than the day I put them in. My neighbor Amos, he's been keeping a kitchen garden since before I was born, and his plot always looks like something from a seed catalog. He walked over one afternoon, looked at my row, and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Caleb, do you have any hydrogen peroxide?" I looked at him like he'd said something strange. "Like, from the medicine cabinet?" "Exactly like that," he said. "Brown bottle. 3%. The dollar store kind." I told him I probably had half a bottle somewhere from when my youngest had scraped her knee the previous summer. He nodded and said, "Go get it. I want to show you something." What Amos showed me that afternoon was something my grandfather apparently knew, his grandfather knew, and somewhere along the way, the modern garden industry decided to replace with 17 different specialty products that all cost $20 each. I bought every one of them. I didn't need any of them. What I needed was in my medicine cabinet the whole time. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 things hydrogen peroxide does for your plants and your garden. All of them backed by what I've personally observed on my own plot, and all of them doable with a $3 bottle from any pharmacy or dollar store. Let's start at the beginning. Here is the science behind this, and it's worth understanding before we get into the 5 benefits. Because when you understand why it works, you'll know how to use it right. Hydrogen peroxide is H2O2, essentially water, with 1 extra oxygen atom attached. When you apply it to soil or plants, that extra oxygen atom breaks off and releases into the surrounding environment. That's the fizzing you see when you put it on a wound, or when you pour it onto soil. That's pure oxygen being released. That oxygen release does something important in the garden. It creates an aerobic environment, rich in oxygen, exactly where plant roots and beneficial microbes need it most. Most plant-destroying pathogens, root rot fungi, anaerobic bacteria, certain molds, cannot survive in an oxygen-rich environment. They're anaerobic organisms. They need low oxygen conditions to thrive. When you flood the root zone with oxygen, you're not just treating a problem, you're changing the entire growing environment in the plant's favor. This is not a new discovery. Gardeners and farmers were using diluted hydrogen peroxide on their crops for decades before the garden product industry replaced it with expensive branded alternatives. The dollar store bottle and the $20 soil oxygenator are working on the same principle. One of them just costs $3. Here's what I want you to hold on to from this section. Diluted hydrogen peroxide. We're always talking about standard 3% drugstore concentration, never anything stronger. Is safe for plants, beneficial microbes, earthworms, and the soil ecosystem when used correctly. At the dilutions we're using, it breaks down completely to water and oxygen. Nothing synthetic, nothing that accumulates. Just oxygen, then water. My name's Caleb. I keep a half-acre plot behind the house, a mix of raised beds for the vegetables I use most heavily, some long ground rows for the things that need more room to spread, and a small greenhouse I run through the cold months for starts. I want to be straightforward with you about what this channel is and what it isn't. I'm not a plant scientist, and I'm not going to pretend I run controlled trials out here. What I do is track what I try, note what works and what doesn't, and only share the things I've used myself long enough to say with confidence that they're worth your time. Hydrogen peroxide in the garden is something I've been using consistently now for going on 3 seasons. I use it in different dilutions for different purposes, and that's important because the dilution matters depending on what you're trying to do. Everything I'm going to show you today uses standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, the plain brown bottle from the pharmacy or dollar store, the kind that costs $2 to $3, not 35% food grade, Not any concentrated form, standard 3%. If you have any other concentration, you'd need to dilute it significantly before using it the same way, and I'd rather you just start with the 3% and not have to think about that math. Keep it simple. All right, 5 benefits. Let's go through each one, how I use it, what concentration I use, and what I've actually seen it do on my plot. The 5 benefits. 1. Supercharges root development. This is the one Amos showed me first, and it's the one I now use on every single transplant that goes into my ground. The method is simple. Before you put any transplant into the ground, tomatoes, peppers, squash, whatever it is, mix 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide into 1 quart of water. That's your soak solution. Submerge the root ball or bare roots of your transplant in that solution for about 15 to 20 minutes before planting. Then plant it normally. What you'll notice within the first week, compared to transplants you don't treat, is that the treated plants shake off transplant shock faster. They establish quicker. They start putting on new growth sooner. The reason is that extra oxygen at the root zone is accelerating cell division in the root tissue. New root growth is stimulated immediately. I took it a step further after the first season. Now, for the first 2 weeks after transplanting, I water my new transplants with the same diluted solution, 1 teaspoon per quart, instead of plain water. The continued oxygen delivery at the root zone keeps pushing root development through the critical establishment period. The roots on my treated transplants at 2 weeks are noticeably denser and more extensive than anything I was growing before. One practical note, this works on seedlings in trays as well. I water my seedling trays with a weaker solution, half a teaspoon per quart, starting at the second true leaf stage. The root development before transplant is meaningfully stronger, which means they handle the move into the ground better. This single benefit alone justified keeping a bottle of hydrogen peroxide in my garden shed permanently. 2. Destroys root rot and fungal disease. The second benefit is the one that can save a plant you'd otherwise lose, and it's the reason I keep hydrogen peroxide in my shed as a first response treatment when something starts going wrong. Root rot is caused by water molds, primarily Phytophthora and Pythium, that thrive in waterlogged, oxygen-depleted soil. The conditions that cause overwatering are the exact conditions these pathogens need to establish. Most gardeners respond to root rot by pulling the plant, or by reaching for an expensive fungicide. I treat it with hydrogen peroxide first. The treatment concentration is stronger than the root development soak. Mix 1 tablespoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. Water the affected plant with this solution, soaking the soil thoroughly around the root zone. You'll see the fizzing. That's the oxygen interacting with the rot. Do this for 3 to 4 days in a row, then return to normal watering. What the hydrogen peroxide does is flood the root zone with oxygen, which directly kills the anaerobic pathogens causing the rot. Simultaneously, it stops the spread. The oxygen-rich environment makes the soil hostile to further fungal growth. I've saved pepper plants, basil starts, and young squash this way when I caught the problem early enough. 2 things to understand. First, this works best when caught early. If the rot is severe and the plant is already collapsed, the treatment may not be enough. Second, once you treat, fix the underlying problem: overwatering, poor drainage, compacted soil. Hydrogen peroxide treats the infection, but not the conditions that caused it. The same treatment also addresses powdery mildew and certain fungal leaf spots. I'll come back to that when we talk about the pest and spray benefit. For now, just know this. If something in your garden starts showing the early signs of root rot or fungal infection at the soil level, this is your first response before anything else. 3. Accelerates seed germination. This is the benefit I was most surprised by, and the one that's made the biggest practical difference in my seed starting routine. Here is the method. Before planting any seeds, especially slow to germinate varieties like parsnips, carrots, peppers, and parsley. Soak them in a solution of 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 1 part water for 30 minutes. You're essentially doing a 50-50 dilution for the soak. Rinse them briefly in plain water, then plant or stratify as normal. What the hydrogen peroxide does during that soak is 2 things simultaneously. First, it softens the seed coat slightly, the outer layer that the seedling has to push through to germinate. A softer seed coat means faster, easier germination. Second, it kills any surface pathogens on the seed itself, fungal spores, bacteria, that might otherwise cause damping off in the early seedling stage. The germination rate improvement I've seen is consistent. Pepper seeds that normally take 12 to 16 days are germinating in 8 to 10 after the soak. Parsnips, which are notoriously slow and patchy, went from a roughly 50% germination rate in my conditions to something closer to 80% after I started using the pre-soak. Those numbers aren't scientific, but they're what I've tracked in my own trays over 2 seasons. I'll add one thing. For very hard-coated seeds, morning glory, nasturtium, certain squash varieties, I soak them overnight in plain water first, then do the 30-minute H2O2 soak before planting. The combination works better on the tough-coated ones than the H2O2 alone. If you start seeds regularly, this one change to your pre-planting routine is completely free, takes 30 minutes, and meaningfully improves what comes up. I won't start seeds without it anymore. 4. Natural pest and leaf disease control. Every season I deal with aphids, sometimes spider mites, occasionally whiteflies, and every other summer, at least one bout of powdery mildew moving through the squash bed or climbing up into my tomatoes. Before I started using hydrogen peroxide spray, I either bought commercial insecticidal soaps, which work fine but cost money and have to be repurchased every season, or I dealt with it too slowly and lost more plants than I needed to. The spray method is simple. Fill a clean spray bottle. Mix 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. Shake it. Spray it directly onto the affected leaves, covering the tops and, importantly, the undersides, where aphids and spider mites prefer to hide. What happens is direct. Hydrogen peroxide at this dilution is enough to kill soft-bodied insects on contact by oxidizing their outer cell membranes. Aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies are all vulnerable. Harder-bodied beneficial insects, beetles, bees, larger predators, are far less affected at these dilutions, particularly if you spray in the evening after pollinators have finished working. For powdery mildew, the same spray applied to affected leaves stops the fungal spread. The oxygen release disrupts the fungal hyphae on the leaf surface. I've caught early-stage powdery mildew on squash and had it stopped within 3 applications over 5 days. Once a full leaf is covered in white, that leaf is gone, but you can stop it moving further. 2 rules. Spray in the evening, not in full midday sun. The solution evaporates too fast to be effective in direct heat, and wet leaves in harsh sun can cause minor scorch. And don't spray the same plants every single day. Every 3 to 4 days during an active infestation is plenty. Between applications, the oxygen has already done its work, and the plants need a normal watering cycle. 5. Oxygenates compacted soil and boosts overall plant vigor. This is the one I call the whole garden treatment, and it's the most fundamental of the 5 benefits, not the most dramatic. The root rot save is more dramatic, but this one is foundational to everything else working well. Here is the problem. In most garden beds, especially raised beds with heavy organic matter, or ground rows that see foot traffic, soil compaction and low oxygen conditions develop quietly over a season. You may not notice it immediately, but your plants notice it. Compacted soil has fewer air pockets. Fewer air pockets mean less oxygen at the root zone. Less oxygen means the aerobic bacteria and fungi your plants depend on for nutrient cycling slow down. The result is plants that look healthy enough, but are performing below their potential. Smaller fruit, slower growth, slightly dull leaf color. The treatment is a monthly soil drench during the growing season. Mix 2 tablespoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Water your beds with this the same way you'd water normally, slow and thorough, allowing the solution to penetrate deep into the root zone. You'll see and hear a faint fizzing at the soil surface. That's the oxygen releasing. What this does over time is rebuild the aerobic conditions in your soil. Beneficial aerobic bacteria, the ones that break down organic matter, cycle nutrients, and protect against pathogens, respond immediately to increased oxygen availability. They multiply. They become more active. Your plants, feeding off that more active microbial community, respond with stronger growth. I started doing monthly soil drenches at the beginning of my second season using hydrogen peroxide. By midsummer, I had a clear enough difference between 2 adjacent beds, one treated monthly, one not, that I didn't need a controlled study to see it. The treated bed had noticeably larger fruit, darker leaf color, and plants that recovered faster from any stress event, whether that was a missed watering or a stretch of heat. This is the benefit that I think gets overlooked, because it doesn't have a dramatic problem-solution story attached to it. There's no dying plant getting saved. It's just your whole garden quietly becoming more vigorous over the course of a season, which, if you're trying to grow real food from real ground, is actually the most valuable thing on this list. Use the monthly drench as your baseline practice. Add the other 4 as specific situations require them. That's the full system, and it's all coming from one $3 bottle. One quick thing before we get to the results side of this. If you want a short weekly note from me, what I'm actually doing on the plot that week, what I'm seeing, what I'm experimenting with, I put one out for people who sign up. No schedule advice from someone who's never grown anything, just what's happening here, on a real plot in a real season. The link's in the description if that sounds worth your time. All right, let me put some numbers around what this actually means. Let me be direct about what this costs and what it replaces, because I think the numbers are genuinely striking. A 32-ounce bottle of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide at any pharmacy or dollar store runs between $2 and $3. At a dilution of 1 teaspoon per quart, that 32-ounce bottle gives you roughly 96 individual quart-sized applications. For the monthly soil drench, you're using 2 tablespoons per gallon. One good drench of my raised beds uses about 2 gallons of solution, which means one bottle covers 6 or 7 full monthly drenches. For a 5-month growing season, one bottle is enough. Now look at what it replaces. The branded root development booster I used to buy runs about $24 for a 16-ounce concentrate. A commercial fungal disease treatment, the kind you buy when root rot sets in, runs $15 to $20. Insecticidal soap spray for aphids and spider mites is another $12 to $15. In a normal growing season before I started using hydrogen peroxide, I was easily spending $80 to $100 on these 3 product categories, sometimes more, depending on what the season threw at me. My current full-season hydrogen peroxide spend is about $9, 3 bottles at $3 each. That's it. 3 bottles covers every benefit I walked you through today. The transplant soaks, the monthly soil drenches, the seed pre-soaks, the pest spray applications, and a treatment or 2 if something goes sideways with root rot. The yield side is harder to put a number on, but I'll tell you what I've observed. In the 2 seasons I've been running the full H2O2 protocol, monthly drenches, transplant soaks, seed pre-soaks, my tomato yields from the same bed size and the same varieties are meaningfully higher. I'm not going to tell you it doubled my harvest, because I don't have controlled comparison data. What I can tell you is that my beds are more productive, my transplant losses are lower, and I've had fewer significant pest and disease events than in any of the 3 seasons before I started this. $91 a season saved. Better results. 1 $3 bottle from the pharmacy. That is what was in my medicine cabinet the whole time. Here's what I want you to do before this week is out. Go to any pharmacy, grocery store, or dollar store and buy a bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide. They usually have it right next to the bandages. It costs $2 or $3. That's your starting point. If you have seeds waiting to be started, especially slow germinators, like peppers, parsnips, or parsley, do the 30-minute pre-soak before you plant them. If you have transplants going into the ground this week, mix up a quart of the 1 teaspoon dilution and give the roots a soak before they go in. If you've got an existing bed that could use some life put back into it, do a soil drench this weekend. Pick one. Don't try all 5 at once if this is your first time. Pick the one that matches what's happening on your plot right now, do it correctly, and note the date and what you did. That record is what tells you, 3 weeks from now, whether it worked. Now, I have a question I want you to answer in the comments. Which of the 5 benefits are you starting with, and why? Is it the root soak for transplants, the germination pre-soak, the soil drench, or are you dealing with a pest or disease problem right now, and the spray is your first move? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them on this channel, and I answer what I can. And if you've been using hydrogen peroxide in your garden for years, and you've got methods or observations I didn't cover here today, share them. Some of what I know now came from comment sections. Before you leave, I'm going to ask for 3 things, and I want to be honest about why each one matters. Hit the like button. This might feel like a small thing to you, but it is how this video finds the next person who needs it. Someone who's been spending $80 a season on specialty garden products without realizing there was a $2 alternative in their own medicine cabinet. When you hit like, you're putting this video in front of that person. That matters to me, and it means something real. Subscribe if you haven't, and turn on the notification bell. YouTube will not tell you when the next video comes up without it. And I put these out on a real schedule. If you found this useful, the next one is going to be useful too. Don't let it get buried by the algorithm. And drop a comment. Not just for me. The comment section here is one of the most useful parts of this channel. People share what's working, ask questions that lead to better answers than I could give alone, and occasionally catch something I got wrong. If that's your kind of community, this is it. Leave something. Next time, I'm walking through everything I've learned about growing tomatoes from seed, including why the seeds inside the tomatoes you buy at the store are often fully viable, and how to prepare them for planting. A lot of people have no idea they're throwing away free seed every time they make a salad. That one's coming up next. I'll see you in the garden.